it's very paradoxical. Shamanism is full of paradox.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense if you try to think about it logically. It makes no sense, actually. Why is darkness so, people are afraid of darkness when it's the place of birth? It's the place where possibility happens. So that's a paradox for most people. And it's really hard to explain the principles of it. I think one of the things that isn't discussed a lot when we talk about spirituality and shamanism, maybe in particular, is the darkness. There's a very, very, very significant dark side. And he had a very significant dark side. He was a very powerful shaman. He was a very flawed human being. He just started moving away from, I don't know what was going on. He used to say to me, sometimes we shamans, we recycle energy, and sometimes the energy gets stuck in us. And I watched him throw up for 3 days after cleaning someone's house, and he was really, really sick. And he explained that to me. He says, I run it through my body, and it changes my DNA. And I think at his age, because he was older, he basically started being more dark than light, put it that way. And things got really difficult for me. And then when I moved there, it was the whole machismo. You're a woman, you're a second-class citizen. I'm the man, I'm in charge. And we were still running the retreat center. And it was like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And that's when things really changed for me. And I realized, maybe I hadn't seen, I had chosen not to see the dark side, because it was probably always there. I just didn't see it, but it really came out when I went to Ecuador and lived with him. So he would always say, no one would ever want to be a shaman if they knew what we go through.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome on this new episodes of the Sanctuary podcast. Today, we are meeting with someone that has quite a story to share with us, Alicia Rodriguez. Good morning, Alicia. Good afternoon for you.
Good afternoon, yeah. Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm fine. Thanks for inviting me to the conversation.
Yeah, and regularly I get sent books from editors to interview people, and some books are okay, some books are good, but I was really fascinated by this one, The Shaman's Wife, your book, Alicia, and it's rare that we get the story from that angle, I would say. And so we're going to dive into this life journey, this initiation, this transformation that you went through. And really, it has all the components and themes of initiation, transformation, awakening, finding meaning in our lives, finding purpose, I guess, in some ways. And how very often in the Western world, we are not equipped to really understand the path, to read the signs, to welcome maybe what is uncomfortable, to see the challenges as opportunity. And I guess as anyone that has worked with the spiritual realm, that very often the message are not always what you want to hear, but what you need to hear. And how do we respond to the call, and what does a call can look like? So Alicia, I'm so excited to have you here today. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. But first, before we dive into what happened, and maybe that's a long story, tell me a little bit more about your childhood. Where were you born? How did you grow up? So before kind of this whole story takes place, but how did you grow up? What are your foundations in this world of the mystical? Was it something that were very cultivated and present, or is it something you kind of got thrown into as you got older?
No, it started when I was really young. So my parents were from Colombia, South America. And they came to the United States, and it was, America, land of opportunity. And I was actually born in the United States. But curiously enough, my father, we never spoke English in the house. I actually went to school without knowing English. And he always said, you're American out there, but in this house, you are Colombian.
Mm.
And that actually encompassed a lot of things. So in that culture, and I would say maybe in the Latin culture, things like intuition, even the way we show affection, the way we connect to one another, our ability to be emotional and not apologize for it, is very much part of a Latin culture. So I grew up in that culture. And part of what happened when I was growing up was there were these incidences, I guess you would call them, in our house where, in hindsight, they were either spirits playing with the lamps and turning them on and off, or my father seeing a good friend of his and then finding out the next day that she had died. All kinds of things happened. And then having things like my mother being able to predict events, which she called sometimes it was a curse because, we got to the point where if my mother said, don't go, we didn't go. We knew something was going to happen because it always did. And there was no way of understanding it. There was no way of saying, okay, this is normal. I went to school in a Catholic school, and I was teased a lot because I didn't look like anyone else. I didn't speak the language. And when I finally learned to speak the language, I told a little boy that I could see spirits. And he told the nun, it was this nun school, and they called my parents. And they thought I had some kind of needed exorcism or something. And my mother was extremely wise. Talked to the mother superior and said, oh, no, it's just her imaginary friends, like children have imaginary friends. But then when I got home, she sat me down with milk and chocolate chip cookies. I remember this like I was 4, and I still remember it. And she said, Alicia, don't tell the Americans. They won't understand. You tell me or your father, but don't tell the Americans. And so I think that was the beginning of my suppressing it, hiding it, or feeling like there's something wrong with me or I'm different. And what saved me was my writing. I've been writing since I was 10 years old. And so I would capture my feelings and these intuitions or insights. And then I started understanding it myself, like, oh, this isn't a bad thing. It's just unusual. And as I grew older, I started reading more about spirituality and different religions. And, there was a whole slew of workshops and things that I did at the time because I was looking for answers. I was looking for like, why am I like this? And why can I see things and hear things that other people don't? And it wasn't until I met, not the shaman in the book, but his brother, who's the one who I first met, that I came to understand, okay, there's something going on here that I can actually, I want to say use, but engage with in a way that's not fearful, and that could be at service to someone else.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing this. So in that story, would you say that thinking of your childhood and the way your family were around, the mystical, the spiritual, the unusual, did you feel that gave you enough skills or enough knowledge already to kind of step into the work you are going to do today? Or were you still stray aside from that in a more Western way, I guess, before you really get into the heart of this work? And we were going to talk about what you're doing and what happened into your life. Or were you just smoothing, sailing into that, I would say, from early childhood, and there was no really getting straight apart? I mean, Catholic school, Western world, America, all of that could have kind of pulled you into a slightly different direction, despite the cultural context you had at home, I guess.
It's funny because the experience I had in my home was the foundation, I guess, for my life, like spiritually. And then what I found is that I had to build on that. It's like if you think of an iceberg, That's a perfect metaphor, right? So in an iceberg, you see the part of up here, but you don't see that there's a huge piece underneath the water.
Mm-hmm.
My family was the huge piece underwater.
Mm.
And my life, the way I built it the American way. I went to school, I did well, I had jobs, I had a great career, I built a couple of businesses. And so that's the top of the iceberg. But there was something sustaining it. And even as I was building my career, because I really had to, we didn't grow up with a lot of money or means. When my father died, I was in college, and so I felt very responsible for my family.
Mm.
So I went to work. So there's this top part of the iceberg that I'm doing, and I'm doing everything that the society tells you to do: go to school, make a living, advance, get promoted. In my case, I'm intolerant of the corporate structures. I found it very limiting. It would limit my creativity. It would limit my ability to be all I could be, my potential. And so I started my own business, helping other people reach their potential
Mm.
as a leadership development expert and as a leadership coach. But I started these intuitions and these insights had now become very integrated in me. And so when I would be doing coaching, I had a reputation for asking what they called the radical question, the
Mm.
question that nobody else dared ask. It was because I could hear it. It
Mm.
wasn't really coming from me. It was, I don't know where it was coming from, but I would ask it and they'd say, why did you ask that question? You know?
Mm.
And so I realized I had this ability that I could use in service of helping other people. But the foundation of it that people didn't see was my home life. And the fact that my mother in particular, um, my father too, but my father died earlier. But my mother really supported us, and all the stories that they would tell us about their ancestors and about their grandparents. And I knew that it was coming from there because they would tell me what my mother would tell me about her mother and her mother's mother and the kinds of things that happened. So it was normalized in my family, even if it wasn't normalized outside.
Yeah, and somehow, I mean, I like the fact you were able to weave that into your more outdoor work, right? What you were doing in the world as a coach and all of that. So it seems like everything is going to go smoothly from now on, right? You're a coach, you went to school, you have a job, you're successful, you're using your intuition. Um, but then you went to Ecuador, and then something happened. So what was the disruption? I would say, what happened that something shifted at some point?
I had 7 years of terrible things happen and huge losses. And my mother used to say, things come in 7 years. And between 2004 and 2011 was hellish. I We lost houses, we lost money. My mother started having dementia. My husband at the time, his mother was in a home. Um, and eventually we separated and got divorced, and my son stayed with his dad, and that's kind of the thing that broke me. Uh, and so it was this deconstruction. It's a
Mhm.
great word. It, it's like my life started deconstructing, and in hindsight, I understand why. Now I can understand why the universe was deconstructing. It was like a really painful process. I was in the hospital 4 times because I was a workaholic, and I would work myself into a hospital 4 times. I mean, it was all of that. And the universe is just saying, it's like, no, this isn't your path. You're supposed to be somewhere else. And
Yeah, but it
then,
must be really hard. I mean, you have a child, right? Losing a child. I mean, not having the custody of it, not having the child near you, and
fortunately, well, he was older, so that was good. He
mm,
was 17 when I divorced his dad, and
uh-huh,
I was we lived very close to one another, so I saw him all the time.
I see.
It until I and then when I moved to Ecuador, obviously I didn't see him all the time. But at the time, because he was 17, I listened to the psychologist said, "Oh no, he needs a father figure more than he needs a mother figure at this point in his life." That's one thing that I think I would I would do differently that in hindsight. I really, so very few things that I would change in my life. And that's probably one of them, or the only one. But then I met a friend of mine introduced me to her boyfriend, who became her husband, named Carlos. And he was an Ecuadorian shaman. And I remember sitting with him and thinking, you know, I was just sitting with him because she told me I should tell him all this stuff. She was one of the few people I told about these things that would happen. And he began to explain them to me in a way that I could understand. And I didn't feel like it was bad. And then I ended up working with him as his client for like 6 years. And I loved him like a brother. He was just a very close to me, and we would do really deep shamanic work. He was constantly helping me with my energy and helping me understand how to manage my energy, which I wasn't really good at the time. Mm-hmm. And then they invited me to Ecuador because my friend, Megan, was doing a dissertation with his brother, an older brother his nickname was Napo, or Napoleon. I know. He said that they named him after dictators. His name was Bolivar Napoleon. He said, they named me after 2 dictators. And then I met him, and the minute I met him, something happened. It was at the airport. I saw him standing a bit away. He had his cap down over his head, and he had dark, kind of long hair. And it was like midnight when I arrived, and I walked up to him. I knew it was him, and I gave him a hug. And the minute I hugged him, I felt this like as if someone had plugged me into an electric socket. This go right up my spine, like a shock. And I remember almost falling backwards. And he was very calm, and all he said is "Bienvenida," welcome. And it wasn't until later that he said the same thing had happened to him, and he was like, okay, this isn't supposed to happen to me. I'm a shaman. This is not supposed to happen. And he said, I knew you were different. I knew there was something there. And that's how it all began that week that I spent with them.
So you meet these shamans, Napo. You're just arriving in Ecuador. And a relationship started, right? And
yeah.
So I guess your whole life from before it's kind of gone. Here you enter a whole different new chapter, right? So what was the life being the wife of a shaman, the partner of a shaman, and what happened there? Because obviously a lot of things happen, and your story was just beginning in some ways, right? There was many more to come to that.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, that week, I've never had such amazing conversations with another human being. And that was really the thing. And I think the timing of it, I had just come off 7 years of a lot of loss. I was just devastated. I was carrying a lot of grief, and I thought I was dealing with it. Clearly, I was not dealing with it. And he was able to, he made me a compelling offer. I can teach you how to be more than the grief you feel. That was a compelling offer. I can teach you to be more than the life you're leading. I can teach you to be more like who you're supposed to be. And that conversation kept going even after I left Ecuador. And then I went back a couple of months later because I thought, this is different. And as that's happening, my life in the United States, I'm becoming more and more disillusioned with life around me. Both, I was working in organizations, and I was seeing a lot of things happening in organizations that I felt was inappropriate or just evil in many cases. And it's like, and I loved my clients, but I was working in systems that were toxic, and I didn't want to do it anymore, but I didn't know what would be possible. And then I started running retreats in Ecuador, and we ran one retreat. The first retreat we ran, we worked so well together. I was so surprised. And he said to me at the end of that retreat, he says, why are we wasting money on hotels? Why don't we just build a retreat center? And I was like,
Oh, so hold on just 1 second. Were you a student of him, or were you already in a relationship here?
I was already in a relationship
Oh,
with
you
him.
were already, you guys were together. Okay. So yeah, why not? Let's build something together, right?
Yeah. But he wasn't, at that point, he wasn't living in the United States because he didn't have his green card.
Mm-hmm.
So I had gotten him the visa to get him into the United States. And then I had to marry him because otherwise he couldn't stay. It was a fiance visa.
Mm-hmm.
And I really had no intention of marrying anybody after my first husband, but it was the only way to manage that relationship. And then I had to get residency in Ecuador. So we were like working both ends, two countries. And once he got the green card, then he came over and we would spend months either in Ecuador or we would spend months in the United States. We'd be going back and forth for several years. And then when we found the land, he stayed mostly to manage the building of the land. And then I would come when a little later on. I didn't move there full time until I think it was 2016, because it just, there was nothing there. It had, the houses were just being built. And then,
But you were doing work together, right? I mean, what was the life? Like you were doing shamanic work, you were hosting retreat ceremonies. So you were diving deep into that work, right?
He was doing, when he was with me in Annapolis, I had an office and he would do shamanic healings at that office. It was a very quiet space. It was a really beautiful space. And so people would come to him for sessions. And then that was when I started seeing what it really was. So, he would have me assist him in many ways. And also during certain parts of it, he would have me sit aside and he'd just say, just watch, just watch. And then later he would explain to me, what was he doing? Why was he doing it? And I could see it in the client. I could see the change and I could see the energy moving in the room. And it was just, I'd never had that experience before. I'd never seen that. And he was an indigenous shaman. He's a 6th generation shaman. So he was very traditional, if you will, in the way he practiced his shamanism.
And what type of work was he doing? I mean, what kind of spirit does he work with? What is his lineage? I mean, not going into too much detail there, but does he work with feathers? Does he work with plants? Does he just work with spirits? What were you experiencing also as you were watching that?
Mostly spirits. And then he had in the altar, he had different modalities. Sound was really one of the techniques he used all the time. It was, if it wasn't a rattle, it was a, how do you say, ocarina?
Ocarina, yeah.
Ocarina, and the drum.
Mm.
And he taught me about drumming and how the different tones of it. And I could hear the tone behind the tone behind the tone when he drummed. There's like 3 layers of tone that I could hear. And he would tell me, and you could see the person like go into an altered state. So he did that. He would created his own liquid, the bottles with the liquid and the plants inside, and he would bless them. And so he used that all the time. When we were in Ecuador, he would use, what is the name of it's an herb. It's a long branch. It begins with R and I can't remember the name of it, but the brushing of the person. So he just, it's his way of doing it. And it was very similar to his brother and to his other brother. he had
So you're there and you're learning a lot, right? And what was going on through you at the time where you're like, okay, I'm going to be assisting a shaman's, my husband per se, or I'm going to grow into it and start doing the same work as him? Where is your life evolving and what happened? Because obviously something happened where you felt like maybe that was not it. There was something else for you at some point.
Well, I'm not a shaman. So, I mean, that was, when I would talk to him, he would say, you can he'd say to me, don't try to understand this with your mind. You won't be able to understand it with your mind. You have to understand it with your heart and the experience you have of it, the relationship you have to it. He said, don't work with your mind. And we call it, the only way to understand it is through sentimiento, emotion, feelings. And so once I would get out of my head, it's very paradoxical. Shamanism is full of paradox. It doesn't make sense if you try to think about it logically. It makes no sense, actually. Why is darkness so, people are afraid of darkness when it's the place of birth? It's the place where possibility happens. So that's a paradox for most people. And it's really hard to explain the principles of it. This principle of unidad totalidad, which is a primary principle. People go, what is that? I don't understand that. And I have to say, well, think of a hologram. The unit is contained in the whole, and the whole is contained in the unit. That is the concept of totalidad unidad, which says basically we are interbeings with everything in life. We're connected, we're beyond connected. We are it. We are it. And most people don't live like that. They have no awareness of it.
Yeah, I mean, the Western view, obviously, of energies and darkness and light, and even working with spirit is so different from the traditional indigenous concept, right? Either from Ecuador or Peru or, any indigenous society, right? So to me, like, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. It seems like you're learning a lot. You're having, kind of an amazing person to watch and to learn from. But it seems at some point you're realizing that there is something else going on. There's a power struggle. I mean, you talk about it in your book if people, are going to read it, but then you finally decide, I mean, what happened that you like, okay, this is not it. I need to get out of this, because it seems to me that it's not every day that you get to spend years with someone that's skilled through generations of learning such art, right?
Well, I think one of the things that isn't discussed a lot when you talk about spirituality and shamanism, maybe in particular, is the darkness. There's a very, very, very significant dark side. And he had a very significant dark side. He was a very powerful shaman. He was a very flawed human being. And he just started moving away from, I don't know what was going on. He used to say to me, sometimes we shamans, we recycle energy, and sometimes the energy gets stuck in us. And I watched him throw up for 3 days after cleaning someone's house, doing and he was really, really sick. And he explained that to me. He says, I run it through my body, and it changes my DNA. And I think at his age, because he was older, he basically started being more dark than light, put it that way. And things got really difficult for me. And then when I moved there, it was the whole machismo. You're a woman, you're a second-class citizen. I'm the man, I'm in charge. And we were still running the retreat center. And it was like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And that's when things really changed for me. And I realized, maybe I hadn't seen, I had chosen not to see the dark side, because it was probably always there. I just didn't see it, but it really came out when I went to Ecuador and lived with him. So like, he would always say, no one would ever want to be a shaman if they knew what we go through.
Yeah.
And yeah. Like, when you see what they go through, like really physically, spiritually, emotionally, it's terrible. But that's their work. That even if they don't sign up for it, they really don't have a choice.
Yeah. So is there any Ecuadorian tradition? Because in the tradition that I've studied, that I practice, if you do that work, you have an elder or a teacher or a counterpart. My teacher, it's his brother, right, that works on him regularly. So in order to, we purge and we do things like that, but you need to have someone else where
was
you
his
are a
brother.
recipient of that medicine. So
Yeah.
someone can come and cleanse you and potentially also remove what you don't see, right? Because there's things you're not going to see potentially. Does he
Yeah.
work like that, or it was just like
No, but it was his brother.
it was his brother too?
Yeah, they
Interesting.
were very, very, very close. Very, very, very close. So it was his brother, but his brother lived in the United States. So he wasn't always with us in Ecuador.
Mm.
But and I think
So
and then he began to hide that darkness. So I don't think his brother
um,
saw it fully. He didn't own up to it, and he didn't share it the way maybe he would have. And yeah, I got to the point where I felt like my life could be in danger, and that's when I left.
oh, to that level.
Yeah, I was to that level. I was almost killed once by the spirits. That was that was interesting. And then yeah, him.
Yeah, I really, I don't want to spend the whole interview on that, but I think that's something really important that you're touching upon around how do we relate to darkness? How do we work with darkness? How this type of work is about opening that relationship to darkness because you're
Yes.
working with people darkness. So you need to be very intimate. It's a lover, right? It's not an enemy. It's something you need to really understand and work with. And I think, as he said, that's something I heard before. And I said before, it's like, I don't think anybody would call that into their life, would ask for it. If you really knew, I mean, today becoming a shaman or doing shamanic work, people are really like, oh, this is what I want to do. But people don't really understand what it comes with. And once you open those doors, the level of craft and discipline that is going to be required to stay in alignment with this light, to stay,
Absolutely.
in relationship with people, to stay, like in this world that we're living in.
He used to say it was really hard for him to be in the world.
Mm,
And I could see it in him, and then he would also like time travel at night.
mm.
And he would tell me, and I could see it because there's a little light that would glow, and I could see it. And then he said to me one time, he says, I just need to warn you, one day you might wake up next to me and I won't be there. So it's like I might not be able to come back. And so it pretty much every night, like he would go whatever work he was doing on the other side, for himself or for others.
So Alicia, I'm guessing, obviously, yeah, you see that darkness, right? And you don't desire to be a shaman yourself or to get initiated or to go through that. And I'm guessing also, I don't know, maybe I'm feeling it, that you also had a lot of compassion, right, for the man. I mean, for the work he's doing, right, at the same time.
Yeah. And that's really hard for a lot of my friends to understand because they don't see that side. They see the more this kind of reality side. But I have a lot of compassion. And one of my friends actually said to me, "Did you forgive him?" And I said, "Yes, I did. I don't excuse him. I don't excuse it." I said, "But I do forgive because I understood that.
Mm,
And and because I don't want the burden of it.
mm.
I don't want to burden my life with it." So for those two reasons, the fact that I understood it from a very different point of view because I lived it, and I don't want to hold on to that negativity. I have a life to live, and I like my life. I I went. It made me exponentially better as a human being and as a person who can help others. So why would I not forgive?
Yeah.
Not
That
excuse.
was a
Don't
gift,
excuse.
obviously. That was a learning and a gift for you, right, in this
In
moment.
many ways, it was. It was a tough way to go. I wouldn't recommend it.
So do you feel there is a kind of a parallel, I just want to kind of come back to this Western world. And when we are confronted with darkness, either within ourselves or within, let's say, our family systems, our friend, right? Someone might have depression, someone might have addictions, someone might go through very hard time, right? And there is this desire in us to hold the space, to be present, to be unconditionally loving, to be compassionate. And love can make you stay, right? Can make you do all of that because it's wide and big. And at the same time, there's a risk, especially, I guess, when you are, husband and wives or constantly together, to be swallowed into
Yeah.
that darkness. And I'm not even talking about shamanic work. I'm just talking, right,
Anyway.
in general, right? And so how do you find that balance, right? Obviously for you stayed many years with them, so you kind of, were okay with it. And was this a sense at some point, I'm going to lose myself in it? Or
Mm,
am I going to be basically not able to even take care of myself, like physically, because something might happen? Or this is just not the life I want anymore. And
mhm,
I want him to be free to be who he is. And in fact, me leaving can also be an act of love. It's like, okay, now you can do whatever you wish there. So how did you deal with that kind of paradox? Because I've experienced that in my life. I've seen it with people where there is this kind of trying to balance the two and not losing the self, and at the same time losing the self in service of someone else, right? Because when you're in service, there's no self. This chemistry, this balance can be very tricky. So what was the moment, or what was the process for you in the moment, say, I can't be with Napo anymore, I leave Ecuador, this kind of relationship with that type of work is not me anymore, and you could see that you pass the threshold of
mhm,
the internal collapse, or whatever sense of being and sense of alignment, authenticity with yourself, right?
mhm. It's really funny when I was writing the book, I started writing the book chronologically, and I had a writing mentor. And uh, when I submitted to be mentored by her, I submitted the first 3 chapters, and she said, "Your writing is good, but you're not in it." I said, "What do you mean I'm not in it? Of course I'm in it." She goes, "No, no, you're not in it. You're emotionally distant."
Mm,
And she was right. And then she said, kind of the question that you asked me. She said, "Was there a moment? Was there a significant moment in time where you said, 'Oh my God, what have I done?'" And I said, "Yes." And I know exactly what that moment was.
so
And I
tell
know
me tell me
so well.
about that. Tell me
It was
about that,
it
right?
was the first, it became the first chapter of the book. She
Mm,
had me when I wrote it and I submitted it, she goes, "This is your first chapter." So of course I had to rewrite everything. But it was a moment where it was a full moon night. And I had woken up and he was asleep. And I went out, got myself a little bottle of aguardiente with my dogs out into the moonlight, and just had this, as we were very high. We were lived like, the property is very high on the cliff, and you can see the ocean, and everything was glittering. And I remember thinking, "Oh my God, what have I done? I've given myself over to someone completely, and I don't know who I am anymore, but I know that I'm not this." And that was my moment. And then from that point on, it was a matter of trying to recover my own power, if you will, my own sense of agency. Curiously enough, it was shamanism that helped me do it, because therein lies the paradox. In a way, a shaman takes my power away, but shamanism returns it to me. And how it was the concept of amor propio. And amor propio means self-love, but I sometimes translate it into self-appreciation,
mm,
which says I value myself because I know, because of the principle of unidad totalidad, I know that I am a part of a universal divinity, a universal life force, and I deserve to have my life. I deserve to be fully who I am. And so that concept of amor propio says, I am more than human love. Amor propio isn't about human love. Amor propio is about universal love and sentimiento and
mm,
the interbeing with all things, including the creator, including the divine. It starts with the divine. That's where it all starts. And when you see yourself as integral, part of, in Catholicism, they'd say it was blasphemous for me to say, I am God. I am a spark of God, right? Or whatever God you have. And so once that landed in me. Like really, I got it in every cell of my body. It was like, wait, I need to take my life back and to do it through amor proprio. So it wouldn't have worked if I tried to do it human love way. The only way it worked, which is why I could forgive, because I had amor proprio, and I knew every cell of my body. I know of that connection. It's an embodied sense. It's not a mental concept for me anymore. It's embodied in me. It's in everything I do, my writing, my work with clients. It's always there. And so it was amor proprio that held me, that said, I need to leave. And then eventually I did, I had to wait for the right moment, and I did leave.
Yeah, and you left, and somehow, now looking back, this was all necessary to your path. This darkness, this difficulty, this waking up at night, this witnessing of this kind of work, right? So you leave Ecuador, you return to the US, or you go to Portugal after that. So tell me a little bit, not the leaving, but what happened after that. So it's another big life change, right? You had one many years before, and you're like, am I restarting from scratch here? I was like, oh, wow. Obviously, you've grown up. You got some upgrade, I guess, in your psyche and your heart and all that with what you're doing today. So was this all those steps necessary for being, not just the writer, but the healer and the person you are today in the world?
So when I knew, I left the property, and I stayed for I think it was like 6 or 7 months with a friend of mine still in Ecuador. And I knew I wanted to leave Ecuador, and Portugal came across. Someone was telling me about Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
And it was COVID. It was the year of COVID. It was 2020, but I decided I was going to go to Portugal. I knew nothing about Portugal. I'd never been there. I knew no one. I didn't know the language, but somehow it felt like I was supposed to, that was where I was supposed to go. So even in the middle of COVID, I arrived in Portugal in December of 2020 to Lisbon. And I brought my Ecuadorian dog with me, Sophie, who is my little guru and my therapy dog with clients. And then 2 months later, it was really cold in Lisbon that year. And 2 months later, I came to the Algarve here, where I live now, and I literally started over, because I left empty-handed. I left the property. I left the huge investment in the property, which I am currently trying to sell, by the way. So if you know, anyway, but yeah, it was like completely starting over.
So we were talking a little bit, offline before we started this interview about this relationship to initiation, rite of passages, the darkness in life, things that comes in our ways that every human being to some degree is going to experience, right? It could be a divorce, it could be an illness, it could be something really big that happened to them, and that somehow what feels like darkness, I mean, what is darkness, what is heavy, what is difficult, is going to launch us into life, into our real life, not the life we've been living so far, but a life that is needed for us to be. And in traditional society, this is very ritualized. There are a lot of ceremony and rituals, rite of passage. As teenagers, as adults, there are those processes, because it's recognized that an adult or a human being is going to go through a certain number of them. And so we're not going to really wait for spirit, God, nature to impose it onto us. We are going to bring them forth, into it. But the Western world, we don't have them. And it seems like when they come to us, we're already seeing that as something really wrong and broken, and we're trying to fix it. Mm-hmm. So now looking back and also talking about the work that you do today, helping people going through that, what is your understanding around that? And I guess from the culture, from what you learned from these shamans, and how do you integrate that for people that don't live in the forest in Ecuador. People that are not going to leave everything, right, to live in the forest, but are maybe going through challenges, or no, deeply down. I mean, I meet a lot of clients that know deep down this is not their life. There is something else for them, right? So what's
Yeah.
your view around this, I would say, Western rite of passage, or this rite of passage into real life?
So the majority of people who come work with me in Portugal, because I run retreats one-on-one, one person, 1 week at a time, because it's not that my retreats are very deep dives with significant questions like what you're asking. And so typically people will come and they are in that, with the space that we talked about, the bardo, the space in between what was and what will be. And they don't know what will be. And for them, they come with a lot of fear and no clarity.
Mm.
And so my work here and how my experience has helped is to make people feel safe enough to have an honest conversation with themselves, because they have a lot of shoulds. I should or shouldn't, blah, 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 whatever it is. And so I think the first thing is to reconnect. People are really disconnected, not only from each other, but they're disconnected from themselves,
Mm-hmm.
from them, and S, like capital S, from themselves, from their soul, from their heart. And when you come here, you're in this environment, beautiful area, cliffs, ocean, organic food. We take care of the fundamental things. They come exhausted. They sleep for at least late for like 2 or 3 days. It's the minute their body they let down, their body just like crashes. They get fed really good, nutritious food, no junk food, movement. We walk the cliffs. I take them walking, and I take them walking in silence because they're not used to silence.
Mm-hmm.
And how the heck are you going to hear your soul if you're not silent?
Mm-hmm.
If your mind isn't still? So I create these activities and practices. I often just customize them for whoever it is. And these practices are meant to, I need to bypass the brain. I need to bypass the mind. The mind is getting in the way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll share with you one of my favorites because it's the ocean. There was a woman who was holding on to her past and just wouldn't let go. So we were walking on the ocean and I said, put your feet in the water. And she did. And I said, now see that wave that's coming? Catch it. She just looked at me and she said, what do you mean? I said, put out your hand and catch it. And so she went over and she's putting her hand, and she's obviously, you can't catch a wave, right? The water is going through her fingers. The water is going, and I'm not saying anything. I'm just like watching her. And you can see the energy rising in her. This thing was rising and rising and rising. I could see it. And then she starts crying. And it's like, okay, I think it broke through. And then she came back to me. She goes, I can't catch the wave. I can't stop it from coming. Mm. I said, yes, you can. And it was like transformative. And this is what nature does if you're paying attention. And if you understand, if you can align with your natural being, with who you are essentially, it doesn't matter. You can go back and be CEO of the company. You can go back and be a professional. You can go back and be your family. But in alignment, you don't have to go to an ashram for a month. You just have to learn how to attune to your soul. And oftentimes you need to leave your current environment because there's too much pressure, too much distraction, too much noise, and too many crutches that keep you where you are. Come away from that. Get in an environment that is completely different than your environment, with someone who can have this conversation with you. And that is transformative.
Mm. Thank you for that. I've experienced that, see that a lot too. And there are a lot of fears when we're on the threshold.
Yes.
We are let's say the end of point A. In fact, a lot of people, turn around, don't go into the threshold, don't go into that. I personally feel we're very ill-equipped to listen, to really understand we're even on a threshold, to even understand why do we have pain? Why would we have discomfort? Because I have the job and I have everything. I should feel really good, right?
Right.
There is not that internal inquiry skill set. There is no, like you say, silence. There is literally no tool to really understand what is going on. So with your experience and also in relation to shamanism, in relation to this darkness, what are the things that you've seen, maybe the one or two things that really blocks people into going into the threshold? Not the one that are coming to see you. They're already like, okay, I need to do that. But you feel maybe people are having a conversation and then they never follow up, right? They don't really do it. What are the things there? And maybe one advice or the biggest thing you could tell people that are feeling that, but are still, they're not in the in-between space. They're not in the void yet. They're still
Yeah.
on the edge of the river, holding really tight.
Yeah. It's fear. It's just that simple. It's like the thing that they're holding on because they're so afraid. And sometimes the fear is bigger than the risk of doing something. And it isn't until it switches where the risk of not doing something becomes greater than the fear. And
Mhm.
so that's how they get off the threshold, where it becomes unbearable, intolerable to be in the same place. So a question I often ask is, I ask them to describe how they feel and why they're having the conversation with me. And then I have them close their eyes and I say, okay, imagine 1 year from now, you have not come to work with me. How do you feel?
Mm.
And it's always, nothing's changed.
Yeah. Probably
It's
worse, right? You feel probably worse.
right, probably get worse. And that's the thing. It's like, if you don't, nothing will change. So you're either going to let the fear win out and you're going to, because you think that it's safer, or you're going to risk what you know in the face of what you don't know, but look at it as possibility that life could be different. Like when they look at my life, I walk my talk. My
Mhm.
whole life is walking my talk, actually. Like it's like my friends say I'm very courageous. I tell them that there's a fine line between crazy and courage, and I'm not sure which side I'm on because because I really don't know some days. But
I
I
hear
have
you a lot. I hear you on that.
yeah, of course you do. You would know this. You would absolutely know this, right? So, like, but what's crazy to some maybe for someone else is courageous for us. But you know, I'm. It's not that I'm not afraid of things. It's just that I'm not willing to tolerate things
Mhm.
that aren't in alignment with how I want to be in the world authentically. And so I don't. That goes to relationships. That goes to where I live. I moved a couple last year because where I had been was not in alignment, like my home, where I live, not Portugal. The work I do, I am focusing much more on my writing now because I've always gravitated to it since I was 10. I've always wanted to be a writer. I don't know, but if you know, but my book won an international book fest award a couple
Oh,
of weeks ago.
beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy it. I I'm going to show the book. It's kind of my getting to the last questions here, but we often talk about, and it's kind of part of your story, right? About giving power away to someone. That often we give our power away into, just someone else. Very often, our husbands or wives or whatever is there. But don't you feel, and it's maybe I don't know, I want to play devil's advocate here, that in fact, what really we're giving power away, it's like the self. Like there is a version of the self that we let having power over the higher version of the self, of the potential power of self. What's really taking our power away is the unresolved trauma that is creating that fear and that pain and not knowing. And that more often, yes, I mean, sometimes our power is taken away, but really what's happening here is this confidence, this courage, or this craziness, right? Many people would have said, you know what, I'm not leaving Ecuador because this is crazy. I've already done it. And you know what, I'm just going to stay. And yeah, you give up on yourself we could say, well, it's Naples' fault, but really it's a
That's
great act of self-courage from you, because you were not chained to a wall, right? So you could leave, and you did leave, right? So do you feel that's really often what happened, that we might blame the system, we might blame the family, we might blame the husband, we might blame, but really ultimately it's more, we have to come towards ourselves with really radical honesty. And it's okay when we're not ready, by the way. It's okay if the fear are still more powerful than where we are at, but recognizing, hey, this is where my work is right now, because I don't have maybe the courage, the craziness, or the stamina, right, to pass that.
Mhm. I think it boils down to the question for me is, what is the wound that I have not yet healed?
Mhm.
Because it's coming from the wound.
Mhm.
And sometimes we don't recognize that we have a wound, or that the wound that we thought we had healed actually didn't heal. And so I think that's the source of it, is the wound. And I will tell you that, and I'm sure this will resonate with you because you too are a healer. We don't get to be healers without wounds.
Mhm.
That doesn't happen. It's on us to resolve our wounds so that we can help others resolve theirs. And so it comes with a price, obviously, but blaming someone else for the way your life is going, at a certain point, you're going to have to turn around and look in the mirror and say, I created every decision, every choice that brought me to this point. What is the wound I haven't healed?
Mhm. Yeah, I often call it the primordial wound. It's like, what is this? It's a gem, right? It's the most dark, and at the same time, it's your gem if you uncover it,
Yeah.
unearth it, right? That is there. It's interesting because, as you say, we need to know our darkness. We need to really inquire into it, and that's what's going to give us skill and service to the other. So I was kind of smiling internally as you were sharing that. I was like, well, you're going the same way as Napo was gone, right? So that's where you're going, into inquiring your darkness and cultivating a relationship with it. So I'm kind of, playing the trickster a little bit here. But do you feel that, in fact, it's full of paradox, our lives, obviously, and even that, but that, yeah, we all have layered darkness that we maybe haven't uncovered yet. You do, I do, right? And in fact, that's where we're going. We're going deeper into that. And maybe that shamans that you were with, just was very advanced on that. And who knows what happened when you are at that depth, with it. I don't know, to be honest, right?
Well, for me, it won't be the same. I already know that because I'm I'm not him, and the bottom of my iceberg was very different than his.
Mm,
The
mm-hmm,
bottom of my iceberg was love, and he did not have that as a foundation,
mm, mm.
because of the way he was brought up. But I think
So that's his primordial wound, right? And
that
that's
was,
what's unresolved there in some ways,
yeah,
right?
and for him, I think it was even in another lifetime as well.
Mm,
Um, I did not have that. I had a different experience growing up as a child, so I think I would never get to that point. But for me, he used to call it going to the basement. He says you have to go to your basement
I like
to
that.
look, and then you'll find the treasure chest with the treasure.
Mm,
That's what he used to say to me. He says you have to go to the basement, and we would do this work together.
mm,
He would say, "It's time to go to the basement. What do we want to uncover?" And then we would have these conversations, and he helped me a lot with stuff. I mean, he actually did, and kind of like it's like pay it forward. I help people with they're going into the basement now, and hopefully they help someone else. But the thing is, I meet it with curiosity and compassion. I don't meet it with judgment,
mhm,
and that includes myself.
mm.
Right? If you can go into that darkness, into the shadow places, if you will, and you walk in with curiosity and compassion instead of judgment, you will find the treasure chest.
Mm. Beautiful. Fully agree with this. Yeah. May we all go to our basement, regularly, and
Yeah.
Or clean up the attic also sometimes.
That's another one. And Napo used to call it clean the brain.
Clean the brain. No brainstorming anymore.
No brain. Clean the brain. You have to clean the brain.
Alicia, thank you so much. I want to, show your book again to people. And if you're listening on the podcast, it's called The Shaman's Wife, I guess. Life is a Shaman. The Shaman's Wife from Alicia Rodriguez. A mystical journey of surrender and self-discovery. It's a really great story. And, I feel that as we all have to descend into those places and go through that, being in touch with stories of other people that are into that is really helpful, because it can feel very alienating to be in those very dark places. And in fact, knowing that from a traditional perspective, this is life. From a more Western perspective, we see it broken, but really it's not. It's initiation, it's transformation. So I really invite you to check, the work Alicia is doing. You can find the link also under this YouTube video and under our podcast, because she's been helping people do that work. Alicia, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Again, The Shaman's Wife, Alicia Rodriguez. Get a copy, read it, have fun reading it. And you will see, it doesn't matter where you are in your life, but I think some part of the story you'll be like, oh, this is me. This is me. Even if you're not the shaman's wife, you might relate to many part of the story around this quest to find our authentic self. To really find this essence through the tribulations, through the hurts, through the pain, and all of that. So thank you, Alicia, for putting beautiful words on your story and sharing with us today.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. It was so nice meeting you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, everyone.